Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Unstoppable Leadership Spotlight podcast. I am Jacqueline Strominger, your host, and I have the most amazing guest for you today. His name is Ed. Hey, Jim. Right? Did I get that right?
You got it right.
Okay. And so, what, guys? Listeners, I want you to know Ed has had an absolutely amazing career in the corporate world. Great companies, financial services. He's done a lot of amazing things, but really what he is doing right now, he is sharing his story and the principles and pieces of knowledge that he has gained from a very interesting childhood. And he has written an autobiography and an amazing fable. It's going to call it The Islands of Four Ps. This is really, really great because, when you read a fable, you actually really remember things because it's a story. This is an amazing story as well that you will actually remember too. But it's start, lessons, and we keep going. So I am so excited to welcome Ed to the show to learn a lot and hear about your principles, your story, and how it pertains to leadership. So I know there are going to be an amazing wealth of nuggets. So welcome.
So nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh my God, it is such a pleasure. So, first when I was looking at your bio, I was like, oh my God, but I saw the, University of Rochester. I looked at where you was reading your story, and there's so many questions I could ask, but, I really am just amazed that you started, 3 years old. You had something crazy tragic in a way happen. And the biggest thing is, well, tell us a little bit about that, but how on earth did you go down the path you went on versus where some people may have gone down a path of destruction? You went to a path of success. And I just find that just so fantastic.
It's hard to define it. I'm going to write another book called From Black Leather Jacket to a Bronze Statue, but we'll leave that one out. The question you ask has been asked to me a number of times, and I've really had a lot of thinking about it because I was kidnapped by my father at 3. And I spent my first 18 years in 15 or so different places, including 5 foster homes. Spent the summer in the YMCA on 34th Street, in a hotel in Coney Island, and then 2 orphanages. And, at age 17 or 18, I became a ward of the state. My father disappeared completely. Father's story is a long one, and it wasn't his fault, so I'm not going to go into that. But I from there, I look back at those 18 years and say, why didn't I make the wrong turn and I made the right turn? A couple of things. Along the way, there were mentors, especially at the last orphanage. But more importantly, I was raised early on. My father had some principles, and although he spent very little time with me, the letters which I kept had messages. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Always work hard. Always do this. Always do that. But then the second step was 5 Catholic elementary schools, where the nuns made it very clear that, there's a golden rule, and they put it out with the golden ruler if you didn't pay attention. They also, said if you do the right things, you go to that good place. If you do the wrong things, you go to that other place. And then finally, when I was a child, when you went to the movies every Saturday afternoon, there were heroes. They were complete heroes. So those were the kind of 3 things that said to me, there's a better life out there. If I do the right thing, I'll get ahead. And then I got a break. When I graduated from high school, I had no money at all, but the mentor at the orphanage said, you got to go to a private college. I didn't know how I'd get there. Didn't have many scholarships in those days, and the scholarship I thought I would get was a New York State scholarship. I didn't get it, but I got the NROTC scholarship, and that gave me the chance to go any place I wanted to go or could get in. I wanted to go to Cornell, but they said the NROTC scholarships is 5 years. The Navy only paid for 4. Didn't know how to do it. So I went to Rochester, which was really a third choice. And that was my first real home. And although the first year was very tough because I didn't have the right clothes, I got rejected by all the fraternities and so forth. As I always say to people, the food was better than the food at the orphanage. And instead of living with a bunch of guys, I was living with one person. So things were better. And from there, I've lived the American dream, and I feel biggest principle I have now today is gratitude. I'm a very, very lucky person. If you describe my life today, I had a really successful business career. I had a simultaneous career in education, and I have the most important thing. I've been married for 60 years next August, and I have 3 children.
Congratulations, that's huge.
No, that's huge, and well, it's her credit. We have 3 children, and we have 8 grandchildren. I have 7 grandsons. So what I started with essentially 1, I now have 16. I'm with my in-laws. So it's I'm a very lucky person, and that's why when I wrote this book, first of all, when I graduated from high school, I went to college. I decided to bury my background. I wasn't going to tell anybody. I didn't want anybody to give me anything because of my background. I was ashamed of it. I didn't want any special privileges for it. So my wife didn't know the whole story. But in my 70s, when I became the chairman of the board of trustees at Rochester, they wanted to know more. And then my wife said she wanted to know more. And then the kids came hard on and said, "You've got to." So I sat down and started to write it. And as I started to write it, first of all, I couldn't write my childhood. My daughter, who's a writer, wrote the first draft of it. And once she got it done, I was able to, just couldn't, there was so many things I buried that I didn't want to remember. And so, when I started writing, I started to learn things about it. Then I started to say to myself, these are maybe ideas I can communicate to other people. And then when I finished the book, it took me 4 ghostwriters. But when I finished the book, I sent it out, and 15 people asked to write blurbs. They said, "You cannot not take this public." So a publisher came running in and said he would publish it. And I thought that would be great because I had nothing else to do. Well, publishers don't do anything. You have to hire a publicist. So you get a hold of people like yourself. So I have a publicist now. The publisher was good, though, because he did a brilliant job on the second book, at least. It's a beautiful book. He also introduced me to a person who did the audibles, and the audibles are great. The second book has 6 voices, and you can do it in about 2.5 hours. It really is. She got rid of all of the work at the end of each chapter, made it a real story all the way through. Now, one of my weaknesses, I should have said this earlier, is answering short questions long. My daughter's at TED Talks. She said, "Dad, that's your problem." So I'm going to stop now and give it back to you if I can.
No, it's actually it's so fascinating. So I want to go back a few different questions. So at what age did you say that you finally started telling your wife and your family about your?
My wife knew most of it, probably 75% of it, because I saved all my letters from my father. Okay. And when he died, he saved all the letters from me. But I really buried it, and I didn't want to talk about it. Well, I was in my early 70s, and and then when Horatio Alger came along, finished it off, and Rochester dug into it because they had to tell a story. But Horatio Alger came and said, "We really like to become a Horatio Alger, member." And then I had to go public with it. And one of my videos is my going public with that, telling the story to the world. I mean, I set out to 1,200 people, and I told them my story, and then they did a video, and it went public and so forth. So when it was out there, and once I got comfortable with it, I really felt there was it's inspirational. I mean, the kids say I have 3 messages. Anything is possible. I'm proof of that because I was a runt too. I wasn't 5 feet, or I didn't weigh 100 pounds when I entered high school. So I had all the problems. And anything's possible. Education is the solution to everything. That's my life. And the last but not least is I have a lot of little edisms, they call them. Last one is never be a victim. Never be a victim, because the energy you use in the victim, you need to use on what's next. And you're going to hear this "what's next" to me a number of times this evening, because that's the answer to a lot of problems. Take that energy, and it's not easy to find out what's next. But I have a couple of examples in my life that you got to be a victim for a couple hours or days, but get rid of that and focus on what's next. Yeah. So those are that's.
You can't dwell on the negative. You cannot dwell on the negative.
It doesn't do you any good if it doesn't. No. And at points in times I could have probably made a point of really hurting somebody who hurt me. Not onward, next.
And so that brings me to some of the kind of key questions or things that really big ahas, because I want you to share this. You said like you did not fault your father. And it's not, and don't, and kind of staying in the same place of don't wallow in being the victim mode. And I think that's, leaders, I really want you to listen to that because it's really big. So you did not fault your father. And was there a point in time where you like maybe a minute of the time
Oh, no,
that you maybe did?
we had a break, a very bad break after I got out of the Navy. Writing the book has helped me not to fault my father, but he loved me more than anything else. That's why he kidnapped me from my mother when they got divorced. And in his letters he basically sent me the message that, in my mind, the one thing you give people is unconditional love. In fact, there's a letter when I was 10 years old, which I kept. It's in the book. Basically, I wrote him a letter and said, "Dad, I'm not as good a kid as you think. Sometimes I'm a bad kid, because I had to convince him, because he would never, I could do no wrong." So that message also is one of the things that sent me forward. But also, when I reflect on people's lives, it's got to be contextual. This man was born in 1900. At 14 years old, he went through the Spanish flu. At 18, he was in the First World War. Okay? Then from the First World War, a couple of good years where he made lots of money, became very successful, then lost it all. Then went through the Depression and the Second World War. And, that leaves very big scars. And so, right. He was just unlucky. Unlike people today, the last 40 years have been almost, besides 9/11, nonstop, straight up. It's a different period of history. Also, he was an immigrant and so on and so forth. So and he did what he could do, and he tried hard. And he abandoned me when I was 15 at the orphanage, and I had to become a ward of the state. And I didn't find out why until 50 years later, when Tom Dewey, the governor of New York's papers, came to Rochester. It's too long a story to tell, but again, it wasn't his fault. So writing the book and studying the thing, I found out that he did what he could do, and that's all we can do. And I also don't blame people. Excuse me.
That's true. We don't blame people, right? We don't blame people. So something that you said that I really kind of want to bring out, and then I want to talk about, how we'll talk about how this all kind of goes into leadership too. But you said lucky, and I would say maybe not the right word, because we create our own luck. You create your own destiny, and maybe things fell into place for you. But I kind of want to get your take on that. And what do you think? What are your thoughts?
The context to me is, I was born in the right time. I was born in the right country, and I got a break when I was I did study hard. I became a varsity athlete and I did well in math and science and so forth. But, I went into my physical for this scholarship, and you had to weigh 125 pounds, and I weighed 122 pounds. And I ate 3 pounds of bananas that morning, and I walked in and got on the scale, and I didn't make it. And the corpsman says, "You didn't make it." I said, "I got to make it. I have no money." He said, "Okay, 125, get out of here." So the luck, that this guy was willing to pass me through, all right? Or just going to the second orphanage. When I became a ward of the state, they could have sent me to a reform school. They could send some wonderful lady found another orphanage in Yonkers, which was close to a high school. And that high school, 80% of the kids went to a private college. And I got an epiphany then. This was my ticket out of my predicament. These people are doing something that shows me the way. So those are all, but also lucky. I mean, America for the last 40 years has been something to behold. I mean, just simple things. 1983, I became the managing partner of an investment bank. All right. The stock market was 1,600. Today it's 45,000. So, that's the wind has been at my back, in that respect, so forth.
Right.
And so, you could have messed it up. There's no two ways about that. People have, but I feel you have to have a certain amount of luck. And in my book, you'll find out in the chapter under plans, after all the studying they do, they spend an afternoon in a festival where there's lots of games of chance, just to give that little extra. You need that little bit of luck. Marrying the right woman. We always, Barbara and I kid each other. So we didn't know each other that well. We were in love, but we didn't know each other that well. And 60 years later, I wouldn't be here without her. There's no two ways about that. She's a real partner. And my P for partner, P1 is the most important decision you're going to make. Get someone you can share your life with, someone who will support you. And by the way, even in your business life, my wife has a much better sense for people than I do. She can tell a bad guy from, and by the way, the network of women that you're around, they know when something is wrong. And, it's shocking. And I wouldn't want to go into that, but she, some person that I was getting very close to, she said, shook her head, and she was dead right. And so I stayed away, and that was very good. But that's a whole process you have to go through, I think. But I've been lucky. You don't go from where I was to where I am today without a little bit of luck, or a lot of luck.
Right. Yeah.
But you do make your own luck. I mean, I did put my head down at age 15, and I said, I'm going to a private college. How do I get there? I'm going to study, and I'm going to work. I worked after school too. It's not same kind of thing. And when I went to graduate school, I didn't work. I borrowed all the money to go to graduate school because I felt in college I didn't do that well. And the reason I did that well is I was working in laundry, in the post office, Highboy hamburger, all that. I had about 7 jobs going at the same time. And, that took away from the studies in some extent. So.
Right. No, it's very interesting. So, one of the things, and you said this, and I want to talk about the P's, because your P's align a lot with what I think are really key principles in leadership. I talk a lot about, leveraging that communication, and that communication actually is what you say to yourself. What you say to yourself is your vision and your mission. And you talk about your passions, and find the things that excite and motivate you. And so, and you just said one of the most important parts is partner too, as one of the other P's. And I want to try to talk about those two things because I'm a real believer that companies today need to really look, whether you're the CEO and you've got 100,000 employees or you've got 3 employees, they're not employees, they're partners.
You're partners.
They're partners. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about,
Well, that you've got it nailed. I had during my lifetime, I had a particular period of my life when I had 3 employees, and at Rochester I had 30 or 40,000 employees that I was the chairman. So I've had this my company, Firm & Sales, when we sold, finally had 800, started with 70 employees, ended up with 800. So I've had this whole process. And getting back to that whole leadership concept, what's your passion? Now, let me just give you the road of my passion. When you're you get a lot of passion, you want to be an astronaut and so forth, but somewhere in your teenage years, you start to isolate your passion. Passion is not an overused word. It's your talents, your interests, your likes, your dislikes. Mine in high school was math and science, baseball and basketball, and girls, probably in that reverse order. And then when I went to college, that morphed. First of all, math and science morphed first into physics, which was a mistake, and then into engineering. Okay, and the baseball and basketball freshman year was over. I wasn't going to be a professional athlete. That morphed into extracurricular activities, and extracurricular activities really, I found my passion. My junior year, taking organic and physical chemistry, I started something called a humor magazine. I wanted to get a look-alike like the Lampoon at Harvard, because I felt that Rochester was a place where fun went to die. And, I said, I'm going to have a little more humor. And everybody's against it. The president was against it. The provost was against it. The librarian was against it. But I put 30 people together, and I truly found my passion, looking back, was to put people together to solve a problem, put people together to create a product. And inside that, there was another passion, which I discovered 10, 15 years later, was I really got a kick out of helping people do better than they thought they could. And that became a very big leadership principle for me. Because when a young man came in about 10 or 15 years later, when I was working, I was at a division, he came in and said, Mr. Hajim, he said, I know why you're successful. I said, what do you mean? He says, because you really want me to be better than I really think I am. And I copied that down. And it's really one of my passion. And then, of course, when you understand your passions, you say, I've got to add principles to that. And that principle there was, which I have on my wall, there's nothing that someone can't do if he doesn't worry about who gets the credit. You connect that. That's a leadership trait. People recognize that you're not trying to take the credit. In fact, I added to that later on in my life, a little bit later, after I got enough credit. I said, I started to deflect credit. Every time someone said to me, "You've done a great job," I would say, no. Yeah, I did okay. But Mary Sue and Jose, they did a great job. Without them, I couldn't do it. And by the way, today's world, you'd never do anything alone anyway. But when you do that, you get a trifecta. You feel good. The person who's spoken to you said, "He's really a good guy." And when Mary Sue and Jose find out, they feel good. So those are what I call transferring your passions and developing your principles to basically, make those passions happen. And I love putting people together. And then that there's other principle which I found to be very, very important is give people as much responsibility as you can possibly do and leave them alone. Because the only thing you have greatest satisfaction in life is doing something yourself. And then the two major words there are two major words are congratulate and celebrate. Congratulate. Anytime someone does something good, make sure you're there. Congratulate. And then, if possible, if it really lends itself to it, celebrate. Those are two. Those are managing techniques. And the last one I want to tell you is never tell anybody you're the boss. Never use the word CEO or managing partner. You're a partner. You're just in many respects. And then you have to have other little techniques, which I always felt there are two goodies in working in a company. One is money and the other is power. You can't have both. David Kearns at Xerox taught me that. He was the boss, but he didn't make the most money. He said some of my salesmen made more money than I did. And at Firm Sales, I worked for them for nearly 20 years. And in only 1 year out of the 20 was I was the highest paid player. And all I was a managing partner the whole time. And so those are little things you do, and I found other people did it. Your question, which I'm answering all your wonderful questions, but my question was, everybody has their own strategies based on their personality and the business situation. That doesn't work all the time. If you've got a really ugly situation, you may have to be the boss and go in and beat people up and so on. And I did that, for some short period of time when I had to turn Lehman around, because I got there, it was a mess. For the first 6 months there, I really had to fire people and change things and so forth. But as soon as I got some kind of rhythm, I went back to this concept of getting people a feeling that it's their company. And that's another thing. In Firm Sales, when we bought it back, I distributed the stock to everybody. In fact, there were 200 shareholders, and I always kidded, I didn't have to come to work in the morning. They were pulling the rock up the hill.
Something that you just said, I think, there's so many great little nuggets here. And something that you said that I just kind of, that really kind of hits home is that, and I really want to applaud you for it. And it's a key takeaway, which is, to not say, to not quote unquote, always like put yourself at like, I'm the boss. But I would even say, even during the time when you may have had to fire people, one of the key things is that you recognize in that you are a partner and you recognize the people who are not playing on the team. No, and it's right. So it's not necessarily being the boss. It's maybe more being the captain. Like, I'm the captain of the team and I get to find out who's not playing in the sandbox the best way, so to speak. And we need to take those people out of the sandbox and find them someplace else where they can thrive. And sometimes by doing that, you can help somebody else be a partner someplace else.
In your mind, you've got to take responsibility when you're eliminating someone to realize that it's at least half your fault. Right. If you believe that and let that person know that, but this is my fault as well as yours. You just don't feel. In fact, one of your answers here is that one of the weaknesses of many managers is they can't do that. They can't do it effectively where the person doesn't feel like. But for example, in almost 20 years at Firm Sales, I think I fired 2 people, quickly. The rest, everybody else was, this is not going to work out. Let's go find you another job. I'll write you a recommendation, And the supervisor and I got together. We tried to find this person another job because really it is when you hire someone, it's your responsibility. If they don't fit, it's your fault. You've made a mistake and it's not fair to blame them.
And that's a key thing. And that goes back, I think, also to the principles that if you know both principles, values, how you want to describe it, I kind of put the principles and values together. But if you know your principles and you know the principles of your company and the values that you have, and you can bring people in, let's say like the top 5 values, they may not all be in the same order, but maybe the top 5.
Yeah.
Somebody might have leadership and whatever, but roughly those same 5 somewhere in their mix, they could be a great fit. If they don't have those and you don't recognize it, then yes, right? Then it's like, you know what? You were not the right fit. My fault for not realizing that. Let's find you someplace else. And or if you are, and I like to think of it in terms of a team within a company, whether it's if you're leading marketing versus operations versus accounting, whatever, maybe that person has the values better fit with the accounting guy or the marketing person, right? So
that's your job.
Right.
See, I had a boss who basically didn't believe that at Lehman Brothers. He would fire people. Just fire. One of the guys in the morning, I came in, I said, "Where is Lou?" I said, this other guy. And he said, Lou Gluckman fired him this morning. He told me to clean out his desk. And guy had 11 children. And I went, there's always, what are you doing? But he taught me that was not the way to do it. And, other people that I'd come in contact, and by the way, it costs you so little, because what happens if you don't treat people right, all of a sudden, if you're in a business a long period of time, you got a lot of bad people bad-mouthing you out there. But if you find you help people along the way, they say, Ed he let me go, but, he treated me right. And that was very important. These are sort of management techniques that I think are very, very vital, especially in today's world, because it's really a small place. But that concept, you got to act. You will hire some incorrect people, or the company will change too. That's another problem. In today's world, what I tell young people is that you're going to have to pivot a number of times because the world's going to change. And when everybody says, "Give me an example," I used to have black records, then cassettes, then discs, and now I have this. And think about being in that business all the way through. If you stayed with it, you're dead. And that's to answer your major question here is what are the biggest blind spots for executives, and it's what's next. I mean, no matter what I have ever been in all my life, even myself, we go away on Christmas time and we sit down and say, what's next? But in my company, I make sure that every year we do something different and new. And most people get stuck, and there's some brilliant examples. Kodak is one, especially when things are too good.
Right.
You just can't do what's next. And I was at E.F. Hutton, and I ran he hired me to run the institutional business. It was a retail firm, a wonderful retail firm, super retail. In fact, it was the best retail firm in the United States, better than Merrill Lynch at that time. And they really had carriage trade, wonderful. He needed an institutional department. He didn't want it very big. I didn't know that. Hired me to institutional business. I got it going. It was going great guns. He said, "Okay, now you're done. You can run the retail business." And that was a really big job. That was wonderful. I said, "You don't understand. The way the business is going is institutional is going to become someday more important than retail." He said, "No, you don't understand." And so I had to leave Hutton because he didn't look at what's next. And then 5 years later, he was gone because the institutional business became the major business. Lehman Brothers at the time was building a trading room with 400 seats in it. And it said, we're going to take advantage of what's coming. So I had to move in that direction. And I think everything you do, I mean, I'm the lead director in the golf club. And every year I say, what are we going to do? What's next? This year we're redoing the pergola in front of the club and so forth.
Right. So I ask you, how do you think companies find what's next? Or how do leaders find what's next?
First of all, your team. I had a requirement that every day at 4:00 we'd sit around a round table. That was one of my secrets of making everybody equal. Have a round table in the conference room. So there was no head of the table. That was very important. And no, but your team should you send the message to them, and you spend time thinking about what I call the drivers: the economy, demographics, geography, most important, technology. They're drivers. Keep looking at drivers. You should, and if you have enough money and you're a large enough company, you should have an outside service that keeps telling you what the big trends are. But your trends really come from your people. You ask each person in each of their divisions, what are your competitors doing really well? What could you do to make, take the next step? What takes you to the next level? These are kind of words you use all with people. And I think that's what happens. And it is you do it weekly, like I did it, in a very mild manner. And then kind of on a quarterly basis or some periodic basis, you do it in depth. You actually go someplace in a hotel room and you sit around with a whiteboard and you brainstorm. And you do that. Mm-hmm. I do that personally every Christmas with my family. And we have, we go on a boat. It's great about a boat. I love giving advice to families. I said to them, you go on a boat. What's great about a boat is at night, guess what? Kids can't get away. Hotel, they're gone. Skiing, they're gone. Boat, they're stuck. And, for years, we went down to the British Virgin Islands with a little tiny boat at the beginning and now a bigger boat. So, no, but what's next has to be a formal experience. And you got to also, this is one of the early things that I've been very important. Failure is okay. In fact, when you asked the question of how do I handle failure, early failure is a gift. You get it in your life, I'm saying. But you also got to contribute to your guys that the fact that if you fail, it's okay. If you're taking a shot that we all think is a pretty good idea, we're all in it together. My board meeting used to be like a Quaker meeting where guys would stand up and say, I need some help. And the guys would all help each other, because we were a small firm and we were competing against a lot of big guys. But what's next is it's a process. And it's not one of these long-term planning things so much. It's little steps, little tiny things. I'm going to add a little of this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to hire a salesman to cover this little new area, So it's little steps. This business about a long journey starts with a small step. It's a cliche, but it really is true. And each person takes a small step.
And I talk about something called 2 steps to yes. And 2 steps is basically, because 1 step doesn't get you anywhere. 2 steps starts creating the momentum, but you have to be taking those 2 little steps, and they get to be bigger and bigger and bigger.
But something 1 step automatically gives you a chance to take a 2nd step. Yeah,
right. So the interesting thing is that, and I think this is really, really important for our listeners, when we're talking about leadership, something that I really want to make sure that we've talked about this, but I want to really kind of hit it home, is that you need to listen. You need to get to that next and find out what's next. You need to keep your ears open. You need to be listening to your team and your partners. Your partners need to be listening to your customers and your clients. And you need to keep your ears open, because you will, if your ears are clogged and you're not listening, you're going to miss.
It may be the most important word. I use that also. People ask me, how did you spend 60 years? How did you stay married for 60 years? And I said, 1 word, listen. No. And the same thing there. You got to listen, especially the head person. You got to listen, because if you start putting things out, you don't know how those are accepted. But when people come to you with stuff, if you agree with it, you're on your way. But you have to listen. Absolutely. I mean, I think when a person says to me, how do you stay married? Because people change, systems change. And if you don't listen to that change, you will get left behind. You'll be a stranger in your family, and you'll be a stranger in your job if you don't listen. You've hit it on the head. You don't need me.
Oh my God. And I could talk to you forever. So how can people find you? I'll put links to the books. You got to make sure I give me links to the books so people can get these. Seriously, I was sitting down yesterday, started to read this one, and I got like probably halfway through it. And I'm like, God, this is really good. And I didn't get to finish it last night. And I cannot wait to read this. I read parts of the synopsis, but really, really great. So where can people find you? How should they connect?
They named the engineering school after me at the University of Rochester. And I always say, I love that, because kids have to pronounce my name correctly. Having an unusual name is wonderful, because if you punch in Ed Hagem into Amazon, you get my 2 books. And if you punch www.edhagem.com into Google, you end up getting a very robust, which is, I give my publicist credit, very robust website. And that's, tells the whole story. In fact, I don't like to put people on my website because they don't have to read the books then.
All right, so go to Amazon, get the books, and download them Audible, so you can listen to them.
Audible. There's 6 voices in and the guy who did they wanted me to read my autobiography, but I did. It took me 2 hours to do 8 minutes, and so I got somebody that sounds like me, and he's quite good, and and we have a lot in common. His father and I both, were in the Navy, both engineers, and so forth and so on.
Oh, well, that is fantastic. So, listeners, I hope you get these books. I hope you've taken some great nuggets and from today's episode. You have to understand that leadership, if you're looking at it from the standpoint of what you can learn from this, think about those P's: passions, principles, partners, and plans. It is really important. Really important. And I'm just going to add the L in there. Make sure that you're listening. So I really, really want you to add that in there. I don't know I can't spell ear or listen with a P. So otherwise I would. So Ed, thank you for being a guest. This is the Unstoppable Leadership Spotlight podcast. If you have loved this, please hit subscribe and please share this with your friends and colleagues. Our goal is to make better leaders, great leaders out there, and great leaders makes a greater world. So thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Ed, once again, for being an amazing guest.
Thank you very much. Amen.